My name's Estelle, and the slides are up at my GitHub. I am the only female engineer by the name of Estelle that I know of. So I get my own domain almost everywhere. And so I have my own Estelle, my own name at GitHub. And all of my talks are up at my GitHub account. So if I reference another talk during this talk, it's all open source, it's all available, feel free to copy it. The session today is about HTML5 forms. Some of you already know everything, or so you think. If this is easy for you, there's still going to be some minutia in it that might be new to you. So it's basically a talk about the input tag. So a little bit about me. My name's Estelle. The reason I talk at conferences is because I'm a Twitter whore, so please follow me at EstelleVW. And I also write some books. If you want to buy them, I make like 12 cents a copy or something like that. So you don't really need to. They're good books, some of them. Mobile HTML5, I might actually give out a copy. Ask a good question that's not pandering to me, and you might get a copy. OK. So this is what everything that we're going to look like, everything that we are going to use today would look like in Netscape 4.7 or IE6 or whatever. So everything we talk about today, you can use. You can use now, because everything we're going to talk about today is progressive enhancement. Okay, so don't think, oh, I can't do this because I'm still supporting old browsers. And if you're still supporting IE6, find a new job. I am not a designer, so everything I do today will be ugly. This is a form, the exact same form supported in HTML5. It's basically a form on crack. And there's a few things in here, like there's a date picker. And there is a number picker, and I'm 21. OK. And then if I put in a phone number, 555-800-555-1212, look, it changed green. There's no JavaScript in this page. So this is all native in your browser, and it's available to you now. And if it isn't available, it's still a form field, and they can still fill it out. And then we have a satisfaction, which there's no output, and my Twitter handle. There. OK, so this is what we're going to learn about. And that, I forgot to fill out a required field. All native, no JavaScript. The only JavaScript in this talk is the thing moving from left to right. So another reason to use forms is not just because you can do the ugly stuff that I just did, but this is what it renders like on a mobile device. Might not look very different to your naked eye, but hey, this is a telephone number, and I got the number keypad. This is a URL, and I got the .com right there. That's an email address, and I have the @ and the period. That doesn't normally come up on your default keyboard. So use these, because it's progressive enhancement, and the people on your mobile devices will be very happy. And then the other thing that we are going to talk about is validation. So you can actually use a native validation, or you can actually write your own validation. And for your own validation messages, it's a teeny bit of JavaScript. It's 3 lines of JS to do that. And then native date pickers. So you don't need to use jQuery, Calendar UI. You have it there natively in your browser. OK, so let's talk about the old input types. We had button, checkbox, file, hidden image, password, radio, reset, submit, and text. File has a star next to it because originally iOS devices did not support file because they did not have a file structure on their device. Now they do. OK, another thing about the file input type, I'm covering this one first because it's an old one, and we're going to cover the new one, is you can actually use just the file input type and tell it what it should accept in terms of file types to activate the camcorder, movie, video, whatever, the camera, or the microphone. File, accept audio capture microphone. That will take care of it. In some devices, Android 3+, Chrome 16, Safari. One thing I'd like to point you to, here is, I'm going to just shrink this page. This is Wufoo's HTML5 page, which I just updated. And it has all the browser support and all of this stuff in detail. So I actually just finished, I pushed this to production yesterday, just in time for this talk. I didn't push it, someone else pushed it, but it's my, I did it. So this is all the stuff in detail if you ever have questions about these things. But let's go back to the talk. OK, So the new input types are color, date, date time, local, email, month, number, range, search, tell, time, URL, and week. There used to be a date time without the local next to it. That was removed from the specification and is not supported in browsers. Then we had attributes that we used to be able to use, and I'm not going to read all of them because you guys can all read. The ones here in gray are form attributes. All the other ones have to do with the input type. A line is a line through it because it is deprecated. Use CSS. And the two that have stars are checked and disabled, and the reason they have stars is because I want to point out that in CSS, you can do input : checked or input : disabled, and you can actually target with styling your input elements without the use of JavaScript, without changing classes. These are UI selectors. Yes, UI selectors. I'll go a little bit more into that in a bit. And these are the new input types. And the ones in gray are ones that I'm not going to cover in depth. The other ones I'm going to cover more in depth. And there's one more that has a star right next to it, which is required. You can do a : required, and you can style based on that selector. Okay, and these are the old elements that we had and the new elements that we are given. So we have a data list, which I will cover, output, meter, progress, and keygen. I'm not going to cover keygen in depth, but just it's basically to generate a key for RSA. So that's kind of cool that you can do that in the browser. Okay, so now that I told you what we're going to cover, let's start covering it. Labels was not on that list, and it's the most important thing, I think, in a form. A label is important for accessibility, not just for a screen reader to let the user know what form, what the label is for form input type, because the input itself doesn't tell you what it's about. But you can associate a label and say, hey, put your first name in here or your last name. So you want to do a label with whatever is useful text to the user, and you put the for attribute right here, and this value matches the ID of the form element. So that is the way you explicitly associate the two. But you can also implicitly associate the two. And right here, my input is nested within the label, so that label is automatically associated with that input. Now, that's good for screen readers, but it's also good for, I was mentioning my granny glasses, carpal tunnel syndrome as well. That button right there is tiny, right? But I can just click anywhere where there's a label, and I can toggle between these two radio buttons because clicking on the label is as if I clicked on the radio button. Similarly, the checkbox, I can either click within the checkbox, or I can click on the label associated with it. And password, that has nothing to do with password. It's just the label on the text input type gives focus to that input type. So it's giving focus to the element that it's associated with. This is supported in Netscape 2. I don't know. It's been supported the entire time I've been doing web development, and for some reason, no one uses this. Okay. So that was that part. That was the lecture part of this talk, and now there's the talk part of the talk. So one of the new attributes is placeholder, and this is not really new. It's been around for a really long time. And you can basically just put whatever you want into the placeholder value, and it will show up. And it will continue to be there when you have focus until you type a single character, and then it will be removed. Originally, the placeholder disappeared the second you got focus, but that was not good for accessibility, so they changed it, and now it stays until there's a character in there. Let's say you are trying to support an older browser. You can use, instead of doing a JavaScript with all sorts of crazy hacks and putting all of your content in your JS, you can actually separate the concerns and pull out the value of the placeholder attribute in IE6 and say, put that in temporarily and remove it on focus. The placeholder text should is not where you want to provide instructions. If you want to actually provide instructions, you do that in the title attribute. Okay, then we have the pattern attribute, which is a way of, in the front end without JavaScript, providing a regular expression that the user needs to match for that to be valid. So if you guys know regular expressions, this says any character between 6 and 9 characters. And if I do, oh, apparently I don't have, I forgot to put error checking on these. So normally I would, shoot, I fixed a different slide and it broke this slide. So I'll show you when it's required and validation that this works. But basically, it will not submit if there's less than 6 characters or more than 6 characters. It will submit, however, if it's empty. If it's empty and it's not required, it is valid. But if you start entering data into it and it's not valid, then it will show as being not valid. The reason that Safari is saying that it doesn't support it is because Safari doesn't do any error checking. So in terms of the UI updating of valid or invalid selectors, it will say, hey, this is valid or it's not valid, but will not stop the form from being submitted because Safari does not do that yet. Okay, here's the required attribute. Oh, and this is where I can show the last one. So here, it's red because it's empty and it's required, and I put a single character in there and it's happy. This one has the pattern attribute, the same pattern that we saw on the last slide, 6 to 9 characters. If I type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not happy. I go with 6, it is happy. 7, 8, 9, it's still happy. I add a 10th character, it is not happy. So that is the pattern that I should have shown on the last slide, but here it is. The CSS that I used for this is input required, border 1 pixel dash red. I did this 2 ways. I used the pseudo class of required, the UI pseudo class, and then I also used the attribute selector. So if you want to do a little bit more backwards or compatible, with because that will actually work. The first one will actually work in IE 6, 7, and 8. You can actually do the first one. The second one will work in any browser that supports the UI. The HTML properties. Okay. Again, Safari supports it, but doesn't support native validation. And the error message in Firefox, if you don't do it, it will actually say, please fill out this field. Okay, so I've been talking a little bit about CSS, so I want to go a little bit more in depth in CSS. So this is how you can match old browsers with the attribute selector, but we also are given all of these UI selectors. These were not in the CSS3 selector specification, but they were in the CSS, in the UI specification. So they've been around for a long time, but they're only in the CSS4 selector specification. So we have default. Default is a weird value. It is basically, if something is default checked when you load the page, that's what it matches. So it's the default value on load. So a radio button, if you had 16 radio buttons and one was pre-checked, that would be the default. If you have a select menu and there was an option that was selected, then that would be the default. I've never seen it used in production. Second one is valid, which is the opposite of invalid. They're kind of self-explanatory. In range and out of range, when we do numbers, that will make more sense. Required is the required attribute. Optional is the lack of the required attribute. And read-only and read-write have to do with disabled or not disabled. Okay. And these are what I'm using, I think. No, the next slide is what I'm using. This slide is just an example of how you would use CSS to enhance a form. These are enhancements, so there's no reason not to use them just because old browsers don't support them. But the first one says, when an input element has focus and it is required, then put a background on it and don't repeat it. But it doesn't say what image it is. Because when it's invalid, I want a warning to tell the person that it's invalid. And when it is valid and it has focus, I want it to have a check mark. But when it doesn't have focus, I don't want to have too many icons on the page because it will be creepy and weird. So this is a slightly better, this is a way of doing a fairly decent UI without making it too busy. In this slide deck, I've used invalid, light pink, valid, light green. Required is a 2 pixels dotted and red, and optional is 2 pixels solid and green. I made the border slightly different in required and optional for people who are colorblind. I'm not sure if the light pink and light green is a good color selection. I apologize if it isn't. And please let me know offline afterwards if that was just the dumbest color selection ever. Autofocus. So autofocus is basically, originally the spec said this, and I filed the bug with the working group a while ago, and they changed it, and I don't know when, but I just noticed it last week that they changed it. So originally autofocus was basically give this element, this input type focus, or the form element focus. Now the problem was that it actually was, if you had more than one, you're only supposed to have one in a document, but if you had more than one, it would select the last one. They came up with a dialog. Dialog is a new HTML5 element, which also gets focus automatically. So they switched it when they, I assume it's when they switched and added dialog, that now it is the first element that either has autofocus or that it is a dialog. So in the DOM, whichever one comes first, dialog or the first element with autofocus is what will get focus. It's as if in jQuery you wrote autofocus attribute, as if it's present, find the first one and give it focus. So here, let's say I'm not in here. When I reload this deck, I probably shouldn't have done that. It doesn't have focus. I probably took it out because it was breaking my slide deck. I apologize. This will actually break my slide deck because it will move the whole thing over to give it focus, so I must have removed it because I didn't want to break my slide deck. But I thought I'd reverted it. Okay, form attribute. Form attribute is an interesting attribute. It allows you to put a form control anywhere on the page and associate it with a form of which it is not a descendant. So here, this input doesn't have a parent form. It could be like in the bottom corner, and your login could be in the top right, right? So you could put a form element anywhere on the page. It doesn't have to be nested within a form. If it is nested in a form, you can actually associate it with a different parent, which sounds like a stupid thing to do. But the worst case scenario about this, and I filed a bug about like, please explain what this should do, but they're keeping it, I think, is if you say remove attribute, or remove the value of this attribute, so form equals the empty string, that form control will be disassociated from any form on the page or in the document. So it will actually be disassociated from its parent. So if you're going to add this attribute, and if you're going to remove it with JavaScript, make sure you remove attribute, not that you just make the string equal to the null value. Ah, here it is. Okay. 1 second. So the type attribute has been around since forever, but it has become more interesting. But before I talk about the various values of the type attribute, I want you to know type has been supported forever. The default value of type is text. So normally type is required, but if you don't put it in at all, it defaults to text. So if you put phone by accident instead of tel, which is the telephone number type, it will just default to text. Or if you put tel and someone opens it up in IE6, it's as if you put phone, it defaults to text. So this is what you're going to get if it fit, in case of any failure. Text, you can still input data and you can still get the information from your user. So yay, you know, supported everywhere. So these were the original types that I talked about. Button does absolutely nothing. There's an input type button, it makes it look like a button that does nothing. So you need to use JavaScript to make it actually do anything. Checkbox is a checkbox. The unchecked boxes, the only checkboxes get the value, name value pair sent to the server. The unchecked do not. Other ones I told you about file being disabled in iOS and earlier, and I told you about the accept property. Image works exactly like the button element, and if you're going to use password, obviously do a post not get for security reasons. Reset, it used to be really popular. It isn't so much anymore because it leads to really bad user experience when someone accidentally clicks it because it's right next to your submit button. So if you're going to include a reset for some reason, make sure it's obvious and somewhere else, not where the submit should be. And all good. All browsers understand these. So there's 12 new input types. I spent a little bit of time in the CSS crossing out the 13 and putting the 12 in red, tilted to the side. It was fun. That's what I do in my spare time. Notice date time is crossed out. Now there's mixed support for these. Some browsers support all of them, and some browsers are still on the fence about how to handle some of these things. So let's cover them. No, let's not. Let's cover one more thing before we get to the new input types. The list attribute. The reason I just changed the deck to put this here instead of at the end, because I'm going to use some examples. So the list attribute along with the data list is super powerful. It basically allows you to do this. There's no JavaScript, but we have a selection of 3 URLs that I'm suggesting might be the good answer for this. It's not just a drop-down list. It's actually for check marks on ranges, and you can actually select colors for the color picker, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So what you do is you create a data list with an ID, and you put options just like the select form, like the form element select. If you want to support older browsers that aren't supporting data list, such as Safari or older IE, you can actually put a select in here. And you just put the word or select, and then you would have the options. And that way you can provide the older users a text input or a drop-down list. And that will work fine, because any browser that supports data list will only support the options within that data list and will ignore everything else within that data list. So that is a good fallback. So here I gave it an ID of data list 1, and in my input, I put the list attribute with the value of data list 1, which is the ID of the data list. So you can actually use your data list multiple times. You can declare one data list and have 27 input types linking to that. I don't know what's on this, so open link in new tab. Let's see what that does. List attribute. Oh, so here are 4 examples of list. There's these 3 all use the same. These 3 actually all use the same value, the same data list. So 10, 30, 50, and I actually put a word here, midpoint, because I used the value attribute of midpoint. And then range has the same numbers, and then number, I used the number input type, 10, 30, 50, 70, 90, and midpoint. And here I said you can only pick red colors. So I'm going to show you how to do this in a little bit. We're going to cover that in the next few slides. Okay. So we have color. Color is very simple. It's input type color, and you get a color picker. And you can pick this color. And then you have to X out of it. So that is a shade of purple. I don't know exactly what shade of purple it is. When I submit it, it will tell me which value it is. You know what I've never done? I've never actually done inspect. Inspect element and see if it does anything. Yes, it actually tells me in the inspector what color I picked. Okay? Notice it is a hexadecimal value. That's what it does. It gives you a hexadecimal value in lowercase. So that I just happened to pick a number that was all digits, but it will be lowercase. So if you're going to do a pattern matching and you don't want to do any back-end server-side or any validation on the front end, it is going to be a lowercase value. So this right here was really stupid as a placeholder because I really should have made that lowercase. Why would I put a placeholder here? Placeholder is not supported in the color input type, but it is supported in Safari. Oh, Safari now supports it. It is supported in IE 11, which does not support color. So in IE 11 or 10 or 9, you will get the placeholder of FFFFF. Okay, and then I also put a pattern for IE 11, which does support pattern, but does not support the color, the widget. So if you notice, this right here, this UI is slightly different than this UI. You see the difference in the 2 UIs? This one has a data list attached to it. And I chose only reds. But like a data list with the input type, you can still put in any value. So I still can do other and pick my little purple. I don't know if you guys know this, but I like purple. I'm even wearing purple pants, because that's the way I roll. Okay. So let me just show you the code for that too, since we have it here. View. And here is the data list. Right there. It says colors FF0000, And then I put 5 others, and I put a label on 2 of them just to see if it did anything, and it doesn't. So that was just a test. And of course, I put the test into production because I don't clean up after myself. My room's messy too. Okay. Oops. 0. There we go. Okay. So URL is another new input type. And it does give you a keyboard that has a dot, and in the United States on the iPhone it has a .com. But it doesn't do much other than that. It does one thing. You basically need to have any letter with a colon, whether it is a valid protocol or not, because you never know what protocols are going to be valid. Maybe G is a valid, you guys would know this better than me. Is G a valid protocol? Never heard of it. But, so some browsers used to require this, but any character will do. So that's what URL does. If you want it to be something valid, it does accept the pattern attribute. So in this example here, these are your 3 most common protocols, HTTP, HTTPS, or FTP, followed by colon, // and any number of characters with a period. That's me doing a regular expression. You probably actually want to do something a little bit more secure. And that's also what fits on the slide. Okay, so these are the 2 keyboards. The original iPhone, .com, and the Android, nothing. It depends on the device, what keyboard they're going to give you. Okay, telephone. It does no native validation because telephone numbers around the world are very different. Some even allow letters. But what it does do is it gives you the telephone keyboard, which is nice. If you actually want to do a validation of your American-style phone number, you can put 3 telephone numbers, like right here. Prefix, whatever. Area code prefix and the 4 digits. Or you can do this. All of these, I probably shouldn't take this off the video because that is my home phone number. 800-9999. There. So I told it, what pattern I wanted. And so if I do that, it's not valid. And people do enter numbers differently. And that's the way I would normally enter it. I would not put the dash. So make your regular expression better than that because you just look like really, I always hate the UIs. I'm like, you have this application, you know how to program, and yet you don't know how to remove dashes from a phone number or put period or, just remove all non-digits and style it the way you want in the back end. But don't make the user have to enter your exact way. I prefer doing the bottom thing. There is an accessibility issue with auto forward. They actually suggest that you not make it jump from one to the next. Because for accessibility reasons, the user doesn't know that they've necessarily moved forward. They're used to typing in the 3 digits and tabbing. And if they tab and you've already auto-forwarded, they're going into the next one. Okay. Email. Email input type accepts any type of email, including ones that are on your intranet. So E@F is a valid email address. Now, if I want to send to many people, B@C, that is not the way to do it, even though some email programs do it. You need a comma. And, it doesn't have multiple. This only accepts 1. Sorry. Here I can put multiple. E@B, semicolon, C@D. That is not valid, but a comma is. I don't need a space. So this is something you might want to tell your users. You know this now because you attended this session, but your users don't know that it needs to be comma separated. So do let them know that it needs to be comma separated if you're going to do that. But if you want to support more than 1 email address, this is a new attribute for us today, which is the multiple attribute. It says basically accept multiple. Multiple is also valid on the file input type. And 1 more, and right now I'm not thinking, so, range. Range will eventually support multiple, it does not yet, but I'll cover that in a minute. So then we have the number input type. Number, you just put type number, and you get the number keyboard, and a little widget right here that lets you go up and down. The spinner is not on all. Android 4, iOS, Safari, and IE10 for Chrome. For Android, IE10, and Chrome for Android don't show the spinner. That is me with bad grammar, or forgetting the semicolon. So number. What number does is it has a few settings that are default. It has it by default has a step attribute of 1. So that means the incrementer is going to increment by 1, and 7.4, well, 7.4, if I had actually put a validity thing on this, would not be valid. I forgot to put that attribute. So there is, right here is a step attribute. Down here it says min 0, max 1000, step 5. So when I hit the incrementer, it's going to go to 5, 10. If I hit down, it's going to go down to 0. It's not going to go any further. If I type in 4 or 7, it's invalid. If I type in 999, it's not valid. 995 is, but 995 is above range. So remember when I showed you out of range? This is out of range. So this is an out of range error. And it also doesn't match the step. So step, if you want it to be a float number, if you only want it to be like change, like $5.10, then you would do step 0.01. If you want it to be any number, like if you wanted to ask someone what the value of pi was, you would do actually step with the keyword any. And I have to add that to this slide because it's not in this slide. And I'm just going to shrink it to see. Nope. I thought there was a different line. There is a different line down there. And I'm just going to delete these lines so I can see what's on the bottom. Oh, yeah. Supporting browsers have advanced UI, and Safari associates the valid but does not actually validate. So the reason that Safari is blanked out is because, again, it doesn't do any native validation. You can get pretty, it's basically any Perl pattern. It's my understanding. I try not to program regular expressions in front of people because I can do color and phone numbers and stuff like that pretty easily. But then when you want to do email address, I'm like, but then there's this exception, then there's that exception, except for in this country you can do this. Okay, so the next one is range. And range is a slider. It's kind of like number, except for it's for looser, it's when you don't need to be as specific. That's what they say in the spec. Similarly, it has a minimum value and a maximum value. And basically, the minimum value is this, 0, and the maximum value is 10. And anytime you drop in between, it will be a step of 1, right? And then here, I have a vertical one, and it goes from 0 to 100 with a step of 5. So similar to a number, it has min, max, and step, and value. And it can also put a data list, just like you can with number. And in Firefox, you can put orient. So let's go to the next slide, and hopefully I answer my questions in the next slide. So, yeah.
Is the size of that thing determined by the CSS? Or by
Here it's actually, I defaulted it. So this is the default. This is the default look. You can change it, and I'll cover that, I think, in 2 slides. Okay, so here, what is wrong with my deck? Remember the range input type was working earlier, right? And it's not working on this one, the data list? Okay, so let's go back to this here and go to here and go. Okay, it is not showing up. Let's try one more place where I have it listed and seeing if and so what I'm looking for is when you put the data list on a range input type, it is supposed to put little check marks, and it was when I was doing my slides last week. Okay, so that is a failure of showing you. But what normally happens in Blink and Firefox but not in Safari yet, but it does work in IE, and I don't have IE on my machine, is because I have a data list showing the numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10, it puts a little check mark on 7, 8, 9, and 10. And here, it shows you 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I'm not sure why it's not working at this moment, probably because I'm doing a live demo. You know, my luck. Okay, so here's a vertical one. And so how did I make it vertical? Eventually, this will be the way to make it vertical, but that is not well supported yet. Basically, making the width smaller than the height will make it vertical eventually. Until that point, in Firefox, you put orient equals vertical. In Safari, Chrome, and Opera, you put WebKit appearance slider vertical. And in Internet Explorer, you put writing mode BTLR, which means bottom, top, left, right. Okay. Then we have search. And search is just basically a GUI thing. If I type in here, you see that little X right there? It's hard to see, very gray. But I can just click that and it clears it out. That is the search UI. It doesn't do anything else, and it doesn't do any pattern recognition or anything like that. The thing it does do is, if you are on a dynamic keyboard, your enter button will become a looking glass, or the word search or go instead of enter. Oh, one note, if you stylize the input, like if you do something like add padding, that little circle will like move or go off the page. It's kind of weird. In certain browsers. So I just never style, or I just don't care that the X is there or not. Okay, so then we have date time. And date time is basically, date is the date. And you can pick any date. And you can use min, max, and step in here as well. So you could, if you want to do every Friday, you would put a minimum of some Friday. Like if it was any Friday ever, you would put a minimum of a Friday like 4,000 years ago. And then they could just, only Fridays would be pickable. Because then you would put a step of 7 for every day. Here, similarly, you have, it allows you to basically have a picker for each one of these. Different UIs behave slightly differently. Let me open this page in a different browser. Come on, Opera. Let me see. Okay, let's do this. And let's open Firefox while we're at it. Okay, so here's the UI for Opera. And this is the date time, so it allows you to pick a date, and then you can pick a time separately. Whereas Chrome allows you to has a little spinner for each one of them. So month is, when you pick a month, it highlights the whole month, and it gives you the month and the year. But week is really weird. So you can pick a week. It starts on Monday, ends on Sunday, and it gives you the week number 42 of 2014, which is this week or next week. I don't remember what I picked. So week, what happens with the first week of the year or the last week of the year? You might end up actually having 53 weeks in 1 year. It's whatever week has the first Wednesday, I believe. That's the first week of the year. And I have to double check that, and I put it, I wrote it into the Wufoo documentation, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Okay. So what are useful dates? Do you want to put your birth date as a date? No. Because then someone has to scroll back 21 years. Yeah. Because you get this date picker, right? And here it's okay, because I would scroll back 21 years. But if I was looking at the Opera date picker, which Opera is open? Oh, okay. If I was to do this, I would be doing, and then clicking different, it would just be annoying. This is actually much better than it used to be. This used to not be here. So maybe now you could do birthdays. But better yet is to pick to do the 12 months, the 31 days, et cetera. Okay. what's a good use of time? So in this example, I start at 9 a.m., I end at 5 p.m., and my step is 900. 900 is 60 times 15. It's a 15-minute increment. So this is going to not be valid, but it increments by 15 minutes, right? And then when I choose AM, it becomes valid because it's within that range. Opera. Here, I don't remember what. That's not helpful, is it? But 15, and then I can go up in increments. So just realize that the different browsers have slightly different UIs. And these are both running Blink. Oh no, this is a really old version, I forgot. I kept the original version of Opera to see what they used to do. So that's actually Android 12 running on Trident or whatever their, Presto, that's it. Okay. So these are some of the form controls that we talked about. I didn't talk about value alt source, height, and width. That's for the image type. Size, you can use in select, and you can also, will tell you what the width of it should look like, but it's not the same as max length. Max length, and now I'm lisping for some reason, which is not here. Yes, it's over there. There's a new one called min length. Min length is not supported anywhere yet, but max length is now supported in text areas as well as input types, but that's an old one. Dir name is for the direction name, and it's just basically an attribute that you add when you're giving the direction for text. So it would be like when you're submitting something that isn't necessarily in right to left, left to right, you would put a dir name in, and dir name, the value would be either left to right or right to left, and you would basically put dir and then the name of the element for direction. In the Wufoo, there's a whole detail, but it's basically, if you ever need it, now you know what it is, look it up. Form no validate, form action, form m-type, form method, and form target. If you remember a long time ago in this talk, I showed you that there were the form attributes, the ones that you actually put in the form tag. These are ones that you can put like on submit buttons and just say, you know what, or change the target. If you click this submit button instead of this other submit button, change the target of the page. That would be form target. Form method, you can actually override the method, the get or post of the form. Okay. Yes?
So with these things, they're pretty much just, if you're supporting open desktop browsers that
I can't hear it, so.
if you will be supporting users that don't have browsers that have the support, you're still going to have to do the validation of the min length, max length, right? So they're right now just convenient to the user that,
You will always, always, always have to do server-side validation because anyone can change any of these attributes and make them whatever they want on the client side. So this does not take care of your security issues, but it takes care of you not having to do JavaScript on the front end. And the thing is, you told the user to use 6 characters. If they use 9 and you didn't put in a validation, this will validate it for you on 90% of users nowadays. It won't validate it for you on the 10%. So you can either choose to use these new attributes in your JavaScript. So instead of saying, because our JavaScripts used to be like this long, and we used to put every single form element as a function in our JavaScript. Now we can actually use these attributes even in older browsers. It's not natively supported in older browsers, but if you put the pattern attribute on an element, you can have like on form submission, any value that has a pattern attribute doesn't match the value of its pattern attribute, even if it's IE6. So you can actually use these for your JavaScript now, and eventually you won't have to have that script in at all. You always still have to do the server side. Okay, So we've been talking about, did I miss something here? No, I talked about it. Okay. So there's validation now. There's the error messages that you get, and this is what they look like. This is a required field. Please enter a valid email address if it's the email type. So we have value missing, type mismatch, pattern mismatch, too long, range underflow, range overflow, step mismatch, valid, and then custom error. So let's talk about the first multiple ones and not the last one originally. Those should make sense to you. Value missing for a required field. Type mismatch is putting a letter inside a number type. Pattern mismatch is not matching the pattern. Too long, not max length. I assume we're going to have too short eventually when min length is there. Range underflow is when you had a min and a max, and you went below or above. That would be range under or range over. Step mismatch, when it's 0, 5, 10, and you put a 4 in, that would be a step mismatch. What I failed to mention with the step is, let's say you want someone to do 4, 9, 14, right? So it's increments by 5, but the last number isn't 5. You would do a min of -1 or a min of 4, and then a step of 5. So that's how you would get. So the step is based on whatever your min value is. And if you don't have a min value, the min is assumed to be 0, but you can still have negative values because you don't have a min. Okay, so custom error is actually, I'm going to show you the next slide, is when you do any of these, like here I'm saying, get element by ID B, get the validity. If the value is missing, this was an age thing, please set an age because it's required. Else, if the range is underflow, right, your value is too low, overflow, your range is too high, else, input set custom validity blank. So here I'm setting a custom validity message based on the range overflow or underflow instead of, so I'm creating my own custom error message instead of the default one. The thing to note about this is if you ever set custom validity to something, you always have to set it to a null value, or else, because you have a custom validity error, the browser assumes that there's still a mistake. So always remember, if you're going to set it to something unique, or you're going to write your own, always set custom validity back to a null empty string. So here's 2 examples. This is just, this is required. Please fill this out. The error message is simply the contents of the title attribute. Oh, I forgot to say this. If you put a title attribute in, notice if I do test me, it says please fill out this field. That is the default value, and then it puts the title in there. Here I put my own message in, and I do try me. Please enter a phone number, but if I do, try me, please match the requested format, and then it puts the title attribute. So there's 2 ways. You can set custom validity, but if you don't want to do that, you just want to give a This title attribute is super cool because it does 2 things. When I hover over this error message is simply the contents of the title attribute. When I hover over this, please enter a phone number. So it does what a normal title attribute does, but it also shows it explicitly to the user if it's wrong. Or you can set custom validity and also give your own message plus the title. Okay, so I think I'm out of time. Was I out of time like 5 minutes ago? I still have about 5 minutes left if you guys want to miss the break. I don't know. Meter, so feel free to leave. But meter is basically, will actually give you a green bar. Unless you have the value optimum, it will actually make it red if your optimum value, or if you have an optimum value that is higher than your highest, and you're lower than your lowest. So you're lower than the low, and you have an optimum that is higher than the high, it will actually turn red. And it will turn yellow if you are below the low or the high. So here, I'm at 85, which is lower than the low but higher than the min. And here it's between the 2, so it's green. So meter is like the gas tank. It's a meter. It's telling you how full. It's not like you're progressing from 0 to 100%. When you're progressing from 0 to 100%, you actually use the progress bar. So here's a gas tank. here's the progress. Progress, this has no value attributed, so it's just animating. But you can also use it to say I'm 75% of the way filled. I'm 75% towards completion. And that was actually the last slide, so I was pretty close to being done. Okay, so just two things. Here is the Wufoo page, and it's wufoo. So there's a link right here. And this has everything. I mean, I spent a month and a half doing these pages, so these all link, and it's just excruciating, painful detail. If you find a bug, please submit a bug. You know, I did it, but I haven't totally corrected everything yet. And if you're super into this kind of stuff, there are jobs at SurveyMonkey, and Wufoo is owned by SurveyMonkey, and they're totally into doing forms. So if you're really into forms, it's a good place to work. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.